There are inventions that change the world. And then there are inventions that should never have existed in the first place. During the final winter of World War II, buried deep beneath a mountain range in Central Europe, a team of engineers began work on something history still struggles to explain. A machine so advanced, so mathematically absurd, so scientifically unacceptable that even modern physicists argue whether the blueprints were genius or insanity. To understand how it began, you need to forget what you think you know about the limits of technology in the 1940s. Forget the primitive radios, the clunky engines, the crude mechanical systems. Because the machine these engineers envisioned didn't fit into the world of 1944. It barely fits into our world. The story began with a single man. His name was Dr. Victor Hayes, a Czech-born mathematical prodigy whose mind functioned like a machine. At age 19, he solved a fluid dynamics equation that leading scientists said was impossible. At age 23, he designed a prototype reactor cooling system that baffled the engineering department of the University of Prague. By 28, he had vanished. Officially, he moved abroad. Unofficially, he was taken by the Reich's most secret research branch, AMT-7/Sonderprojekt, a division known for working on technology far beyond wartime necessities. Hayes' assignment was not to build a bomb, not to build a tank, not to build a rocket. His assignment was to create something that should not have been able to exist in the physical universe according to the laws of the time, a machine that produced mechanical output without conventional fuel. To the world, it sounded like perpetual motion, pseudoscience, madness. But the Reich had intercepted Soviet documents referencing a strange energy anomaly detected in the Ural Mountains in late 1942, an anomaly Soviet scientists couldn't explain. And Hayes was told one thing: replicate it. He wasn't given the full story. He wasn't told the political consequences. He wasn't even told what the anomaly was. He was simply given access to unlimited materials, a staff of over 40 elite engineers, and an underground mountain laboratory carved from solid granite. His instructions were clear: build a machine that defies known physics. The anomaly the Soviets recorded came in the form of a perfect blue sphere of light that hung over a frozen lake for nearly 46 seconds before vanishing. Witnesses reported their watches stopping. A nearby truck's engine died. A metal compass snapped its needle. All radio communication went silent. Officially, the Soviet government blamed atmospheric interference. Unofficially, they opened an investigation named Project Sfera. The Reich learned about Sfera through an intelligence leak, and the moment they heard electromagnetic dead zone, they believed it could be weaponized, or industrialized, or, at the very least, understood. Hayes disagreed with all of it. He didn't believe it was a weapon. He didn't believe it was natural. He believed someone or something had created it, and he was going to find out how. The laboratory chosen for the project was known only by its code name, Felswerk 13. Carved into a cliffside, the facility was not on any official map. It had one entrance, one elevator shaft, and one goal: to build the impossible. Inside, Hayes assembled his team: electrical engineers, metallurgists, theoretical physicists, and 2 mathematicians who had been pulled from universities without explanation. They were all sworn to secrecy. They all signed a document stating they understood failure would be treated as sabotage. And then they began. For the first 5 weeks, they tried to replicate the anomaly using conventional electromagnetic theory. They failed. Then they tried high-voltage discharge systems. Failed. Then rotating magnetic fields. Failed. Optical resonance chambers. Failed. Every attempt ended the same way. The machine produced energy, but less than what was required to run it. Basic physics. Unbreakable. Unmovable. But Hayes didn't accept that. On January 14, 1945, he wrote a sentence in his private notebook: "We are approaching this with the assumption that nature is predictable. What if it is not? What if we exploit the unpredictable?" The next day, he changed everything. Hayes' breakthrough came from a branch of mathematics so obscure it wasn't even fully recognized until decades later: nonlinear field coupling. In simple terms, he proposed something absurd: A machine whose energy came from manipulating instability itself. Not fuel, not electricity, not pressure. Instability. Chaos. If the machine could force a field to vibrate at frequencies that should cancel each other out, but didn't, it could create a cascading effect, a loop that fed itself, a system where input and output became blurred. To modern ears, it sounds like fringe theoretical physics. In 1945, it sounded like witchcraft. Most of the engineers rejected it. Some argued it violated the second law of thermodynamics. Others said it was mathematically inconsistent. Hayes didn't argue back. He simply built a prototype. At 2:47 on February 1st, 1945, the first test of the prototype began. The machine was small, barely 1.3 meters tall, shaped like a cylindrical chamber wrapped in copper coils and tungsten plates. The team expected sparks. Smoke. Nothing. What happened instead became the first official record of the machine defying physics. When Hayes activated the core vibration sequence, something impossible occurred. The machine's internal temperature dropped below zero, without consuming coolant. The coils frosted over. The chamber walls contracted, and a halo-like shimmer formed above the device. One engineer fainted. Another ran out of the room. Hayes simply stared, mesmerized. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a physical phenomenon, violating basic thermodynamic behavior. And it lasted for nearly 12 seconds before the machine overloaded and shut down. Afterward, the engineers ran every calculation imaginable. None of it made sense. The machine had not consumed energy. It had absorbed it, like something was feeding from the surrounding environment, from the air, from the electromagnetic field, from something unseen. There was only one conclusion, written by the mathematician Otto Recht in his daily logbook. The machine is not producing energy. It is redirecting it from somewhere else. It was a theory too terrifying to explore. But Hayes had already decided they were going to make it bigger and stronger and stable, because if they could control the effect, if they could understand it, they could create a machine that didn't just bend physics. It could break it. The night the prototype froze itself, the Felswerk 13 facility changed forever. Before that moment, the engineers had treated the project like an eccentric assignment, something bizarre, ambitious, perhaps delusional, but ultimately grounded in the limitations of physics. After that night, no one slept, no one joked, no one dismissed Hayes' theories anymore. They had seen a machine violate the laws they'd spent their entire careers defending. They had watched temperature drop without coolant. They had seen frost form out of thin air. They had witnessed a shimmering distortion that behaved like a gravitational ripple, yet produced no measurable mass. The machine shouldn't have worked, and yet it had. Now they needed to know why. At 6:20 the following morning, the entire engineering team crowded into the main briefing hall. Some still in lab coats, others clutching notebooks, all of them pale and wide-eyed. Dr. Victor Hayes cleared his throat. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the tremor behind it. "We did not observe an anomaly," he said. "We created one." Immediately, objections erupted. It violated energy conservation. No closed system can behave like that. We measured negative temperature drift. That isn't possible. This machine should not exist. Hayes slammed his palm on the table. "Exactly," he said, "which means we did something nature is not built to allow." The room fell silent. He pulled down the chalkboard and began writing equations faster than most could follow. Nonlinear oscillation, resonance amplification, field collapse, and finally, the formula no one dare consider, delta zero, a negative energy shift, the opposite of what any machine should produce. "What if," Hayes said, turning around, chalk dust on his sleeves, "our machine didn't break the laws of physics? It simply operated under laws we haven't discovered yet." No one spoke for a long time. Finally, the young mathematician, Recht, whispered, "You're suggesting the machine created a localized pocket, a zone governed by alternative physical conditions." "A temporary violation bubble," Hayes replied. "Small, unstable, but real." And that was when the team realized the truth. They weren't trying to understand machine. They were trying to understand the phenomenon. 3 days later, the second prototype, codenamed Unit B, was completed. This one was larger, heavier, and reinforced with double-layered tungsten plates. The chamber was fitted with a multi-phase rotation system to synchronize the oscillating coils that had produced the anomaly. But the real innovation was something far stranger. A circular aluminum frame mounted around the core, with 24 copper rods extending outward like the spokes of a wheel. No one knew exactly what it would do, but Hayes had theorized that the rods might serve as stabilizing anchors, distributing the resonance distortions outward and preventing another uncontrolled collapse. When they switched on Unit B, nothing happened at first. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the temperature began to drop, not violently like before, predictably, smoothly. 5 degrees, 10, 15. The engineers monitored every gauge, every frequency reading. And then it happened again. The shimmer, not a glow, not a beam, a distortion, like the space above the machine was bending. Hayes stepped closer. "Is that a wave?" one engineer whispered. "No," Hayes said. "It's a boundary between our physics and something else." The distortion grew, stabilizing briefly before flickering like a dying flame. Then the machine shut down on its own. But this time, they had recorded everything. Every voltage drop, every frequency spike, every sub-zero fluctuation. Unit B had lasted 34 seconds, 22 seconds longer than the first prototype, enough to prove the effect was reproducible, enough to prove this wasn't chance, enough to terrify the men funding the project. 2 days after the Unit B test, 2 black cars arrived at the facility's hidden entrance. Inside were 3 men wearing black leather coats, accompanied by armed guards. One of them, an officer with cold gray eyes, introduced himself as Oberst Richter, a representative of the Reich's highest scientific command. He was not there for congratulations. He was there for answers. "We received your initial incident report," Richter said, pacing the room. "This phenomenon your machine creates, does it have military application?" "No," Hayes replied immediately. Every engineer in the room froze. Richter raised an eyebrow. "No, this is not a weapon," Hayes said firmly. "It is not stable. It is not predictable. We barely understand it. Could be scaled up?" Richter pressed. "Not safely. Could it disrupt enemy power systems? It could disrupt our own. Could it produce energy?" Hayes hesitated. "Technically, yes. Practically, no. It absorbed energy. From where, they still didn't know." Richter leaned forward. "The Reich wants results, not theories. You will continue." Then he added the part that chilled everyone in the room. "And you will accelerate." Hayes knew what that meant. Delays would not be tolerated. Failure would not be excused. This machine, this anomaly, was now too important and too dangerous. Unit C was not a machine. It was a construction project. It took up an entire chamber of the facility, a towering cylindrical structure wrapped in iron and copper bands, surrounded by reinforced pylons anchored deep into granite floor. It looked less like an engine and more like a reactor. The oscillation coils were tripled. The resonance field emitters were arranged in a spiraled lattice around the core. Even the stabilizing rods were expanded from 24 to 60. The engineers nicknamed it Der Comb, the comb, because when it activated, it was supposed to comb space, pulling the distortion into a predictable geometric pattern. It was the most ambitious machine ever attempted in 1945, and everyone feared it. The test was scheduled for midnight. At 23:58, the engineers took their positions. Monitors crackled, coils hummed, the facility trembled. At 0:01, Dr. Hayes activated the resonance sequence manually. The core ignited. The temperature plummeted, faster and sharper than before. Frost crackled across the floor. The oscillation coils glowed white. Then came a sound no one had heard before, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to shake the air itself. The distortion didn't shimmer this time. It formed. A circular ripple appeared above the machine, flat, smooth, almost metallic in appearance. It grew larger, wider, more defined. Then, suddenly, it locked into a perfect sphere. A blue sphere. Cold, silent, impossible. Nearly identical to the Soviet anomaly recorded in 1942. Engineers shouted readings. Numbers spiked beyond calibration. Metal beams groaned under pressure from forces they couldn't detect. "Shut it down!" someone yelled. "We can't!" another shouted. "It's feeding itself." Hayes stared in awe. The machine was no longer consuming power. It was no longer absorbing it. It was generating something. Something new. Something foreign. And then the sphere vanished. Not collapsed. Not faded. Vanished instantly, leaving no afterglow, no echo, nothing. Every gauge flatlined. Every sensor died. The machine fell silent. Frost still clinging to its frame. Unit C had worked. And that terrified everyone. When they reviewed the data, the team found something impossible. The sphere hadn't been an energy bubble. It had been a field inversion. In a space measuring 1.3 meters across, the machine had briefly created conditions where normal physics did not apply. Gravity weakened. Magnetic alignment reversed. Entropy dropped to near zero. For 7.4 seconds, the laws of the universe changed. Hayes's note said it plainly. We didn't build a power system. We built a physics override. And if the Reich learned that, if Richter realized a machine could be scaled, it would change the war, change the world, change everything humanity understood about reality. Hayes made a decision that night. A dangerous one, a treasonous one, a necessary one. They would never let the machine reach operational stability. Not for the Reich, not for anyone. But the orders from Berlin were already coming. They wanted Unit D, a full-scale device, large enough to affect not meters, but kilometers. And Hayes knew in his heart, if they built Unit D, it wouldn't just defy physics. It might destroy them. Dr. Adrian Keller did not look like the kind of man who would reshape the laws of physics. He wasn't a decorated military officer or a celebrated war hero. He wasn't the type whose photograph was printed on recruitment posters or pinned to briefing room walls. He was, simply, a man who refused to believe limits were real. And that made him dangerous. For years, Keller worked quietly inside the engineering division of the Bureau of Advanced Mechanized Research, an agency so small that even most military generals didn't know existed. He kept to himself, buried in blueprints and equations, dismissing colleagues with polite nod and returning to the world inside his notebooks. But on the night of November 3rd, 1942, everything changed. It was almost midnight when Keller stepped into conference room C, still wearing his soot-stained lab coat. The room was packed, generals, scientists, intelligence officers, and every one of them turned toward him. At the head of the table stood General Marcus Halden, a man with a reputation for breaking projects and people who failed him. "You're late, Doctor," Halden growled. Keller set a stack of papers on the table. "I was running a test, sir." "A test?" Halden asked. "Or another one of your fantasies?" A few officers smirked. Everyone in the building knew Keller's ideas were considered reckless. Some called him brilliant. Some called him insane. Most called him a waste of resources during wartime. Keller ignored the noise and clicked on the projector. A blueprint illuminated the room. A machine unlike anything they had ever seen. Half engine, half turbine, half something no one could explain. There were layers within layers, coils that looped into themselves, a chamber that looked like it swallowed light, an equation scribbled across every margin. "What you are looking at," Keller said, "is a machine that breaks one of the most fundamental rules of physics." The room fell silent. "You see," he continued, "every machine we've ever built has been limited by friction, resistance, waste heat, or mechanical drag. Everything we design loses power with every step." He tapped the blueprint. "But this machine gains power." Murmurs erupted. Halden raised a hand. "Explain." Keller inhaled deeply. He knew what he was about to say could end his career. Or worse. "Sir, what if energy didn't only move forward? What if, under the right conditions, some of it could return? What if a system could feed itself?" A colonel scoffed. "Impossible. A perpetual generator? Another laughed. He's dreaming. Keller's jaw tightened. No, he said, not perpetual, not infinite, but self-reinforcing. He pointed at a spiral-shaped coil on the blueprint. This chamber uses magnetic inversion at microscales. Instead of energy bleeding out, the machine folds it back inward. Not perfectly, not fully, but enough to amplify its output. The physicist slammed his hand on the table. That violates the law of conservation of energy. It would, Keller said quietly, if we were creating energy, but we aren't. We're redirecting what's usually lost. Around him, skepticism thickened like smoke, except for one man. General Halden leaned forward, eyes narrowing, not with doubt, but hunger. If what you're saying is true, Halden said slowly, what could this machine power? Keller didn't hesitate. Anything. The room erupted into laughter, insults, accusations. Some officers walked out. Others demanded Keller be dismissed from the program entirely. One physicist shouted that Keller was spitting on the foundations of science. But Halden didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He stared at the blueprint like a starving man staring at food. The meeting ended in chaos. Keller gathered his papers, dignity hanging by a thread, and walked back toward his lab. He expected security officers to follow, to escort him out, maybe even detain him for wasting military time. But something else happened. Halden stepped into the hallway behind him. Doctor, the general said, walk with me. Keller followed him down a dim corridor toward a restricted section of the facility that he had never entered. You're either a genius, Halden said, or a lunatic, and I intend to find out which. They reached the vault door. Halden entered a code, and the steel barrier slid open to reveal a small room, empty except for a single wooden crate. Inside the crate was a half-constructed device, the same device Keller had drawn. He froze. I don't understand, Keller whispered. Halden folded his arms. You're not the first person to think physics has cracks that can be exploited. Who built this? Keller asked. That, Halden said, is classified far above your clearance. Keller stepped toward it, slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. The unfinished machine looked almost alive. Strange conduits wrapped around an inner chamber. A set of copper-lined rings sat off to the side. Some components were old. Others were brand new. Finish it, Halden said. Sir, you heard me. You're not starting your machine. You're completing theirs. Someone tried this before, and they failed. But their failure doesn't matter anymore. Keller swallowed. What happened to them? Halden's expression didn't change. They stopped being useful. Work began the next morning, but Keller quickly discovered something terrifying. The previous engineers weren't just incompetent. They were missing. Their names were erased from files. Their offices cleared. Their badges invalidated. It was as if they had never existed. And yet, he found traces. A note wedged inside a toolbox. Asterisk, it works, but not how they think. A warning scratched into a steel panel. Do not activate with full power. A burnt notebook page hidden under a workbench. The chamber bends more than energy. Keller tried to show Halden, but the general dismissed the warnings. They were cowards, Halden said. We are not. Keller sensed danger. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that whispers. By December, the machine was complete. It stood in the center of the lab like a mechanical beast. Cables draped over support arms, coils humming faintly, the core chamber glowing with a dim blue light. Keller hadn't slept in 2 days. Halden stood behind glass in the observation booth, surrounded by officers eager to watch the test. Keller took a slow breath. He activated the first switch. A low resonance began to fill the room. The machine vibrated, metal plates rattling like bones. He activated the second switch. Lights flickered. The humming grew deeper, almost organic. He reached for the final switch. In the booth, Halden leaned forward. Do it. Keller hesitated. Something inside him whispered that the missing engineers weren't erased because they failed. They were erased because they succeeded. And success terrified someone. But Halden was waiting. Keller flipped the last switch. The machine roared to life. Light spiraled inward. A shock wave rippled through the air. Papers lifted off the tables. Metal instruments slid across the floor. And for one impossible moment, the machine produced more power than it consumed. The reading spiked. Alarms blared. And then the machine shut itself off. Silence. Absolute silence. Keller stood frozen, chest pounding. In the booth, Halden smiled. A dangerous smile. A smile that meant the project was no longer experimental. It was weaponizable. As Keller stared at the smoking machine, he felt something cold settle in his spine. He had done it. He had created a device that defied physics. But in doing so, he had given the military something far more dangerous than a weapon. He had given them a reason to erase him, because men who change the world rarely get to live in it afterward. The machine sat silent in the center of the lab. Smoke curled from its vents. The faint echo of the shock wave still vibrated in the metal beams overhead. Dr. Adrian Keller stood frozen, his fingertips still resting on the final switch. He wanted to feel triumph, victory, satisfaction. Instead, he felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He had succeeded, and success was now the most dangerous thing in the room. Behind the observation glass, General Marcus Halden slowly removed his headset. For a moment, just a moment, his face revealed something primal. Not curiosity, not admiration. Ownership. The kind of look that said, "This is mine now." He turned to the officers around him. "Lock the building down," Halden ordered. "Nobody enters. Nobody leaves. Not until I say so." The room erupted with action. Security teams sprinted into the hallways. Heavy blast doors thundered as they shut. Lights switched from white to dim amber, containment mode. Keller felt his throat tighten. "General?" he called through the intercom. "Is that necessary?" Halden didn't answer. Two soldiers stepped into the lab instead. "Keller," one of them said, "step away from the machine." Keller slowly backed away, hands raised. He knew better than to challenge armed soldiers. They weren't here to protect him. They were here to control him. The machine, his machine, was now surrounded by men in armored vests. Halden finally entered the lab, flanked by officers with clipboards and engineers Keller had never seen before. "Keller," the general said, "you just demonstrated the most important technological breakthrough of the century." Keller forced a small, nervous smile. "Thank you, sir. But the test wasn't stable. The readings were—" Halden raised a hand, cutting him off. "It doesn't matter. Instability means potential, and potential can be harnessed." Keller's heart sank. "Sir," he said quietly, "this machine is not ready for weaponization." Halden stepped closer, eyes cold and unblinking. "You don't get to make that decision." Keller felt something inside him shift, like a line had been crossed. A line he didn't know existed until this moment. "What do you plan to do with it?" Keller asked. Halden smirked. "Everything you fear, Doctor." Within hours, a convoy arrived, trucks, black sedans, vans marked only with serial numbers. It looked less like a scientific deployment and more like a military occupation. Dozens of new personnel filed in. Physicists from classified divisions. Engineers with no names on their badges. Intelligence officers trained to disappear people. Metallurgists, mathematicians, and experts in fields Keller didn't even recognize. Every one of them carried a red folder. Every one of them avoided eye contact. They walked past Keller like he was old furniture, useful once, irrelevant now. Halden stood in the center of the chaos. "This is Project Fallout," he announced. "Effective immediately, all research shifts to weaponized amplification. Keller will remain as consultant until further notice." Consultant, a demotion wrapped in a death sentence. Keller's blood ran cold. That night, Keller forced himself to review the test results again. He sat at his workstation, surrounded by soldiers who pretended not to watch him. He examined the resonance waves, the flux density, the energy inversion ratio, the chamber's internal pressure, the strange thermal anomalies. And then he saw it, a pattern, a distortion, something that shouldn't have been there. The machine wasn't just amplifying energy. It was bending space inside the chamber. Just slightly, just enough to register on the sensors, as if the rules inside the device were different, not broken, just rewritten. Keller's pulse quickened. This wasn't simply a physics-defying generator. It was something else, something new, something dangerous. He printed the graph and ran toward Halden's office. "General," Keller said, breathless, "you need to look at this." Halden didn't look up from his desk. "It can wait." "No," Keller insisted. "It can't. The machine is affecting spatial integrity if you push it too far." Halden slammed his pen down. "Keller," he said through clenched teeth, "you have done your part. Now let us do ours." "It could collapse the chamber," Keller warned. "Or the building. Or—" Halden looked up sharply. "Or what?" Keller hesitated. He didn't know. Not exactly. But the graph hinted at something terrifying. "A tear," Keller whispered. "Not a literal tear. A discontinuity. A rupture where normal physics break down." Halden stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You just gave me another reason to proceed." Over the next week, Keller noticed something disturbing. He was being excluded. Shift schedules changed. Access keys were reassigned. Lab notes disappeared from his desk. Files he once had full access to were now locked behind security levels far above his clearance. He approached Halden again. "Am I being removed from the project?" Keller asked. "Of course not," Halden replied. "You're simply being repositioned." Keller knew what reposition meant. The previous team had probably been repositioned too, straight into oblivion. Later that night, Keller heard alarms in the distance, alarms he had never heard before. He tried to access the lab. Access denied. He tried a second door. Access denied. A third. Access denied. His badge was useless. He sprinted to an observation deck overlooking the main chamber just in time to see the new team powering up the machine. Without him, they were pushing the machine far harder than he ever had. "Stop!" Keller shouted against the glass. "You're overloading the chamber." Nobody looked up. A blinding light burst from the core. The air inside the chamber rippled like heat rising from metal. And then, a sound like metal screaming. A shock wave of white-blue energy. People stumbling backward. Sparks exploding across the floor. Halden grabbed a railing as the whole facility shook. And for a brief, horrifying moment, the space inside the chamber folded inward. Not collapsed. Folded, like fabric tightening around an invisible needle. Keller staggered backward, breath frozen in his throat. This wasn't amplification. This wasn't energy inversion. This was something else. Something he had feared from the beginning. The machine wasn't defying physics. It was creating new physics. The chamber lights finally died. The machine slumped forward, smoking and cracked along its outer plating. Technicians rushed in, coughing, stumbling wide-eyed with shock. One man was dragged out, unconscious, burned along his arms. Another knelt on the floor, staring into nothing, whispering, "Wasn't supposed to look back." Keller shuddered. Halden stormed into the observation deck moments later, face flushed with rage. "You see," Halden snarled, "it works. It nearly doubled its output. It nearly tore itself apart." Keller shot back. "General, you don't understand what you're dealing with." Halden leaned in, eyes burning. "You think I care?" Silence hung between them like a blade. "This machine," Halden said coldly, "will redefine war, and if you stand in the way, I will replace you with someone who won't." Keller stared at him. It was official. General Halden didn't just want to use the machine. He wanted to own the laws of the universe. And Keller knew, at that moment, the true danger wasn't the machine. It was the man trying to control it. That night, Keller made a choice. If Halden continued, the machine wouldn't just collapse the chamber. It could tear open something far worse. Something that couldn't be closed. Something the world was not prepared for. So Keller did something no engineer wants to do. He began planning to destroy his own creation. Because the machine didn't just defy physics. It defied the responsibility of man. And he knew, if he didn't stop it, no one would. The corridors of Fellsworth 13 had never felt colder. Not the winter outside, not the steel walls, not the reinforced concrete stacked against a mountain's heart. It was the weight of inevitability. Dr. Adrian Keller moved through the shadowed hallways with a quiet purpose. Every step echoed against the stone, a reminder that he was walking through a tomb built by human ambition. The machine, the culmination of years of secret experiments, of math-defying reason, of a force no one in history should ever have controlled, sat at the center of the facility, humming faintly even when powered down. It had a presence, a weight, a consciousness that seemed to watch him. Keller understood it now. The machine wasn't just a tool. It was a test. And the humans in the facility were failing. General Marcus Halden was no longer merely interested in the machine. He was consumed by it. Every morning, he would enter the lab, eyes darting over the machinery, running his hands over the cold steel like a pianist caressing keys. Officers reported him speaking softly to the device, as if coaxing it into obedience. Keller saw it differently. The general didn't want control. He wanted dominion. "What are you doing here, Keller?" Halden asked one morning, his voice unusually soft, almost admiring. "I've come to ensure nothing catastrophic happens," Keller replied. Halden laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was a sound of someone who believed fear was a tool, and he held the handle. "Catastrophic," Halden said. "This is the beginning of a new era. We are not here to play it safe. We are here to win the war, no matter the cost." Keller's stomach turned. The war was ending. Berlin was crumbling. And yet Halden's vision had nothing to do with victory. It had everything to do with legacy and survival at any cost. Inside the facility, the tension was palpable. Some engineers had become almost fanatical, seeing Halden's vision as a path to greatness. Others were terrified, whispering about the disappearances of those who had dared question the project. Keller was in the middle, a mediator, a rebel, a silent observer, and now, the conscience of the machine itself. The schism among the engineers grew worse as Unit D, the full-scale machine, neared completion. Dr. Otto Rieck, the mathematician, refused to work on the energy inversion arrays anymore. He muttered about the universe bending around them. A young metallurgist had quit entirely, claiming the materials were unstable, and had been quietly escorted out by military police. Keller alone continued, not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. He had to understand the machine before anyone else could destroy or misuse it. March 1945. The war was collapsing. Halden ordered Unit D assembled in the deepest chamber. It was massive, twice the size of the previous prototypes, layered in copper, tungsten, and reinforced steel. The core chamber glowed faintly, like the eye of a storm waiting to open. Keller supervised from the control platform, his hand hovering over the emergency cutoff switch. Every instinct screamed that this was beyond testing. This was the brink. Halden entered, surrounded by his officers. "Today," he said, "we will see history rewritten." Keller exhaled slowly and began the sequence. At first, the machine responded like previous prototypes, a low hum, frost forming along the chamber walls, a subtle warping of light. Then the resonance escalated. The hum became a vibration that shook the steel girders. Monitors began to flicker as the energy readings climbed into uncharted territory. Keller felt his ears pop as if the air itself had condensed. He glanced at Halden. The general's eyes were wide, but not with fear, with anticipation. Unit D began to create a field larger than any before. The engineers had calculated a 5-meter radius for stability. The distortion stretched 20 meters, then 50. "Cut it!" Keller shouted. Halden raised a hand. "It is not the time." The field expanded, wrapping around the lab like an invisible cyclone. Metal bent. Instruments levitated. Sparks flew without explanation. And then, a shimmer in the center of the chamber, the same blue sphere that had first inspired the prototypes formed. Only this time, it was massive. Keller's heart stopped. For the first time, the machine was fully operational. And no human, not even its creator, could control it. Unit D pulsed, each cycle of resonance now creating subtle tears in the spatial fabric inside the chamber. Keller realized these weren't just anomalies. These were micro-discontinuities. Gravity shifted. Objects moved on their own. Time seemed to hiccup, measured seconds stretching and collapsing unpredictably. Keller shouted over the cacophony. "It's unstable. We have to shut it down now." But Halden would not hear it. He was entranced by the display, convinced that mastery over the machine equaled mastery over the world. And then it happened. A massive wave of energy radiated from the core, sending every monitor into blackout. Alarm screamed. The building trembled. Concrete cracked along the mountain's interior. Keller grabbed the manual cutoff lever. He pulled with every ounce of strength. Nothing happened. The machine had become autonomous. Keller understood in that moment. If Unit D continued, it could tear the facility apart, or worse, create a rupture that could spread beyond the walls. He glanced at Halden. The general, oblivious of the danger, continued to give orders, scribbling diagrams on his clipboard as if the world outside the lab didn't exist. Keller's decision was made. He would destroy it, not for the Reich, not for Halden, for humanity. He began sabotaging the outer coils, destabilizing the resonance emitters, and wiring explosives to critical support pylons. Every step was calculated. Every action had to be precise. If he failed, the machine could collapse the lab, kill everyone inside, and perhaps alter physics in ways he could not predict. As the machine's hum reached a deafening pitch, the outer walls of the lab began to warp under the strain. Keller set the final detonator, sweat dripping down his face. He sprinted through smoke-filled corridors, dodging falling equipment, hearing shouts from officers and soldiers caught in the chaos. Halden appeared at the end of the hall, furious. "You can't. What are you doing?" Keller didn't answer. He pressed the detonator. The explosion was sudden, focused, and terrifying. Unit D tore itself apart from the inside, collapsing into a glowing, blue inferno of impossible energy. The chamber buckled. Concrete shattered. The facility groaned as if in pain. Keller barely escaped through a service tunnel, crawling, bleeding, exhausted. Behind him, Felswork 13 collapsed into a mountain of rubble, taking Unit D and its secrets with it. When he emerged outside, the snow had fallen silently, hiding all evidence. The war raged on, unaware that one of his most dangerous secrets had been obliterated. Dr. Adrian Keller survived. The Reich would surrender weeks later. General Halden vanished, likely killed in the chaos of Berlin's collapse. Unit D was gone. Its technology lost to history. But the machine's brief existence had changed him forever. He knew what humanity could never be allowed to harness. He had touched the impossible and survived. In the decades that followed, fragments of reports would surface in secret archives, mislabeled, ignored, or classified for eternity. Hints of impossible devices. Machines that bent reality. Energy that shouldn't exist. Dr. Keller never spoke of what he had done. Not to colleagues. Not to historians. He burned his notes, erased his calculations, and lived quietly in exile, knowing that some inventions are too dangerous, too powerful, too real to ever be revealed. The machine that defied physics had been built. It had been destroyed. And the world, unknowingly, had been spared. The mountains of southern Germany had swallowed Felswork 13. Concrete, steel, and machine that defied physics now lay in ruins, hidden beneath snow and debris. Dr. Adrian Keller stood on a ridge, staring at the jagged peaks where he had lost so much, friends, colleagues, and a part of himself he could never reclaim. The war was ending. Berlin burned. The Reich was collapsing. And yet in the quiet of the snow, Keller felt the weight of something heavier than history. Unit D had been destroyed, its impossible power obliterated. But the consequences of its existence lingered in every thought, every dream, every sleepless night. He had witnessed a machine that could defy physics, bend reality, and potentially reshape the world. And now, he had to live with the knowledge that such power could never fall into human hands. Keller returned to society quietly. He avoided fame, invitations, and recognition. The war had created heroes, villains, and martyrs, but he had become something else entirely. In the archives, there were whispers of Felswork 13. A few classified documents survived, heavily redacted and mislabeled. Some called it Project Fallout. Others simply filed it under experimental energy devices, failed prototypes. No public record mentioned the machine's true capabilities. No one spoke of the blue sphere. No one described the spatial anomalies, the resonant fields, or the terrifying power that had almost destroyed everything. It was as if the machine had never existed, and yet Keller knew better. The world had been spared, and the knowledge that it could have ended the war or changed the course of history entirely remained locked inside his mind. Keller often wondered about the others. The engineers who had vanished, were they executed, erased in the night, or did they survive, burdened with knowledge too dangerous to share? He had no answers, only fragments. A burnt notebook page hidden under a workbench. A cryptic note left in a toolbox. Do not trust what bends. A warning scratched into a steel panel. We cannot hold it. He realized the truth. Human beings were never meant to handle such power. The military had desired control, but control had always been an illusion. Unit D was more than a weapon. It was a force of nature. And nature does not bow to generals, engineers, or dictators. Years passed. Keller lived quietly, moving from town to town, country to country. Every so often, he would see a faint blue shimmer in the corner of his vision, a flicker of light that reminded him of Unit D. No one else saw it. No one else felt it. But he knew, somewhere in the world, the principles of the machine had left a mark that could never be erased. And that mark whispered a warning. Human ambition is relentless, but the laws of physics, real or rewritten, are eternal. Even if the Reich fell, even if Felswerk 13 was destroyed, even if the machine had vanished forever, the blueprint had existed, the machine had existed, the knowledge of what humanity could achieve and what it should never attempt survived. Keller understood that he carried a burden heavier than steel or concrete, a secret so profound that sharing it could ignite wars, spark rivalries, or tempt others to attempt what he knew was forbidden, the moral weight of knowledge, the responsibility of survival. He burned his notes. He erased his calculations. He avoided the company of others who might pry too deeply. Yet every night, he dreamed of the machine, of the blue sphere, of the resonance fields, of the energy that bent reality itself. He understood the temptation, the desire to rebuild, to perfect what had been destroyed. And he understood that the temptation was precisely why it must remain lost. Decades later, historians would piece together fragments of the Reich's secret experiments. They would marvel at the prototypes, the blueprints, the ambitious designs. Some would assume the stories were exaggerations. Others would believe in the existence of impossible machines. But no record would capture the truth, that for a brief, terrifying moment, humanity had touched the impossible. That a machine had existed which could bend the laws of physics, defy energy and alter reality, and that, in the end, it had been destroyed, not by enemy fire, but by the conscience of a single man who understood that some knowledge is too dangerous for the world. Dr. Adrian Keller never spoke of it. He never taught it. He never tried to recreate it. And that, perhaps, was the most important invention of all, the understanding that some forces are beyond control, and that survival sometimes demands a sacrifice of knowledge itself. Even now, in the silence of the archives, in the deepest vaults of classified documents, there are whispers, a faint glow in a photograph, a scribbled note buried in a margin, a reference to a prototype too advanced to be believed. And those who stumble upon it wonder, could it have been real? Could humans have touched the impossible? Could one machine have ended a war in 30 days? The answer is hidden, locked away in memories of men who survived, in the ruins of a mountain facility that never officially existed. And in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, Keller sometimes swears he can feel the machine's pulse, a heartbeat of impossible energy, a whisper of a world that almost was, a secret the universe itself demanded remain hidden. The machine that defied physics was gone, but the memory of what it could do, and the terror it inspired, would never fade, and humanity would never know how close it came to touching the impossible.